I'm sitting in a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning, and my hands won't stop shaking. The woman lying in that bed down the hall is my CEO, and I've been in love with her for 6 months. Victoria Chen almost died tonight in a car accident, but the doctors say she's going to be okay. I keep replaying everything in my head, wondering how we got here. It all started on a night that seemed completely normal. I was 27 years old, working as a junior analyst at a tech consulting firm in downtown Seattle. My job wasn't glamorous. Most days I stared at spreadsheets until my eyes hurt, building financial models for clients who barely acknowledged my existence. That particular November evening, I'd stayed late again, trying to finish a project that my manager needed by morning. The office was nearly empty by the time I packed up my laptop. Rain hammered against the windows as I rode the elevator down to the parking garage. All I could think about was getting home to my tiny studio apartment, heating up some leftover Chinese food, and maybe watching something mindless on my laptop until I fell asleep. The drive home took me down Harrison Avenue, a street lined with old brick buildings and flickering streetlights. Traffic was light because of the storm. Most people had the good sense to stay home on a night like this. I was about 4 blocks from my apartment building when I noticed something unusual. A black Mercedes sedan sat on the side of the road with its hazard lights blinking. The rain made it hard to see clearly, but I could make out someone sitting in the driver's seat. My first instinct was to keep driving. Seattle has its share of problems, and stopping to help strangers late at night isn't always the smartest choice. But something made me slow down. Maybe it was the way the person sat so still, head down like they'd given up on everything. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you are watching from and hype this video in the comments. I love hearing from you all, and your support means everything to me. I pulled over behind the Mercedes and sat there for a moment, debating with myself. The rational part of my brain said to mind my own business. The other part, the part that sounded like my dad's voice, said that decent people help when they can. I grabbed my jacket from the passenger seat and stepped out into the rain. Water soaked through my shoes within seconds as I walked toward the car. The closer I got, the more I could see. The person in the driver's seat had their head resting on the steering wheel. Long dark hair fell forward, hiding their face. I tapped gently on the window, not wanting to startle them. When the person looked up, I actually took a step back. It was Victoria Chen, the CEO of our entire company. I'd seen her exactly 3 times in person during my 18 months working there. Once at the company-wide meeting where she'd announced our latest funding round. Once in the elevator when she'd been on her phone the whole ride and hadn't noticed me. And once walking through the office with a group of executives, moving so fast I'd barely caught a glimpse of her face. She was 40 years old, which I only knew because someone had mentioned it during her birthday celebration that got sent out in a company email. In every interaction I'd witnessed, she'd seemed completely in control, confident, almost intimidating in how put together she appeared. But the woman looking at me through that rain-streaked window was different. Her makeup was smudged. Her dark hair hung loose instead of in its usual professional style. And she'd clearly been crying. She rolled down the window slowly, staring at me like she wasn't sure I was real. Her voice came out rough when she spoke. "Do I know you?" I told her my name and that I worked at the company. Recognition flickered in her eyes, though I doubt she actually remembered me. "My car died," she said, and her voice cracked a little. "About an hour ago. I've been sitting here trying to figure out what to do." I asked if she'd called for help. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was the kind of laugh that comes right before you start crying again. Roadside assistance says 4 hours because of the storm. I called some friends, but everyone's either busy or too far away. I tried calling a car service, but they're all booked. She looked down at her hands on the steering wheel. "I don't know why I'm telling you this. You probably have somewhere to be." I didn't, actually. My exciting plans involved reheated lo mein and falling asleep on my couch. But even if I'd had plans, something about seeing her like this made me want to help. Maybe it was because she seemed so human compared to the polished executive I'd seen from a distance. Or maybe I just couldn't drive away and leave someone sitting alone in the rain. "I'm not a mechanic," I told her. "But I know a little about cars. My dad made sure I could at least handle basic problems. Would you mind if I took a look? She hesitated. I could see her weighing whether she should trust a junior employee she didn't know. But desperation won out. She popped the hood and I got to work. The rain came down harder as I examined the engine with my phone's flashlight. Water dripped down my neck and soaked through my jacket. My fingers were numb within minutes. But I kept looking because I'd said I would help, and I wasn't going to give up after 2 minutes. It took about 15 minutes of checking different components before I found the problem. The alternator belt had snapped completely. I couldn't fix it permanently, but I had some rope in my car from when I'd helped my friend Eric move last month. It wasn't ideal, but I managed to create a temporary belt that would at least get the car running again. When I told Victoria to try starting the engine, it turned over immediately. The look on her face was something I'll never forget. Relief and gratitude mixed with something else I couldn't quite identify. She thanked me over and over, and I could tell she genuinely meant it. I started to head back to my car, but she called out to me. "Wait," she said. "Would you mind following me home? Just to make sure it doesn't die again." I agreed, partly because it seemed like the responsible thing to do and partly because I was curious about where someone like her lived. I followed her Mercedes through the winding streets as the rain continued to fall. We drove into the Laurelhurst neighborhood, one of the nicest areas in Seattle. She pulled into the driveway of a beautiful modern house with huge windows and perfect landscaping. It was the kind of house I'd seen in magazines but never thought I'd actually visit. She got out and walked over to my car window. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and she looked more composed than she had 30 minutes earlier. "Thank you," she said again. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." Then she paused, like she was debating something with herself. "Would you like to come in for coffee? It's the least I can do after you spent 20 minutes in the rain fixing my car." I almost said no. Every professional instinct told me it was weird to go into my CEO's house. We barely knew each other. She was important and successful, and I was just a junior analyst who processed data and made PowerPoint slides. But something in her voice made me change my mind. Maybe it was the loneliness I heard underneath the words. Or maybe I was just curious about what her life was actually like behind the executive persona. "Sure," I said. "Coffee sounds good." Victoria's house was even more beautiful inside than outside. High ceilings made the space feel massive. Hardwood floors gleamed under soft lighting. The furniture looked expensive but comfortable, the kind of stuff you see in design magazines. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with business books and novels and art books about painters I'd never heard of. Framed photographs showed her in different cities around the world. Paris, Tokyo,
Barcelona.
the kind of life I'd only dreamed about living. My studio apartment had a futon that doubled as my couch and a desk I'd bought at a thrift store. This place made me feel like I was visiting a museum. She led me to the kitchen, which had marble countertops and appliances that probably cost more than my car. She started making coffee while I stood awkwardly, not sure where to put my wet jacket. "You can hang that by the door," she said, noticing my hesitation. "And please sit down. You look like you're waiting for a job interview." That made me laugh a little. I sat at her kitchen island while she worked the coffee machine. It was one of those fancy ones that grinds the beans fresh. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and rich. "I had the worst day," she said suddenly, "even before the car broke down. Do you ever have days where everything feels like it's falling apart?" I nodded, even though I doubted my worst days compared to hers. She was a CEO. She ran a company worth millions of dollars. What problems could she really have? But as she poured our coffee and we moved to her living room, I started to see a different side of her. She told me about her day, and it sounded genuinely awful. A meeting with investors who questioned every decision she made. A board member who publicly challenged her strategy in front of the whole team. An important client threatening to leave unless she personally handled their account. 3 different employees coming to her with problems she had to solve. "And then my car died," she finished. "And I just sat there thinking that maybe I wasn't cut out for any of this. That maybe everyone was right to doubt me." She looked at me like she'd just realized she was talking to someone from her own company. "Sorry, I shouldn't be telling you all this. It's not very professional." I won't tell anyone, I said, and I meant it. Something about seeing her like this made me want to protect her privacy. She smiled, a real smile this time. Thank you for everything tonight, for stopping to help, for fixing my car, for listening to me complain. We sat there drinking coffee, and the conversation started to flow more easily. I found myself telling her things I normally kept to myself. About moving to Seattle 18 months ago after my engagement fell apart. My fiancée Emily had been pushing me to go to business school, to be more ambitious, to want more out of life. When I told her I was happy with my job and didn't need to constantly chase the next big thing, she said I lacked drive. She left me for a guy who worked in private equity and talked about money all the time. She said I'd never amount to anything, I admitted. That I was too comfortable being average. Victoria set down her coffee cup and looked at me directly. Being content isn't the same as being average. Some people spend their whole lives chasing success and never figure out what actually makes them happy. You already know. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Nobody had ever said anything like that to me before. It made something tight in my chest loosen a little. She told me about her own past. She'd started the company when she was 28 with just an idea and determination. She'd faced investors who didn't take her seriously because she was young and Asian and female. She'd worked 18-hour days for years, building something from nothing. And somewhere along the way, I lost my marriage, she said quietly. My ex-husband Marcus couldn't handle my success. The more the company grew, the smaller he seemed to feel. He started making comments about how I was never home, how I cared more about work than him. But when I tried to include him, to share my excitement, he'd just get angry. She'd been divorced for 2 years. She lived alone in this big house that sometimes felt too empty. She traveled for work constantly but rarely took vacations. She had colleagues and business contacts but wasn't sure she had real friends anymore. Everyone sees the CEO, she said.
Nobody says me.
I understood that feeling more than she knew. At work, people saw the junior analyst. The guy who showed up on time and did his job and never caused problems. But nobody asked what I actually wanted or what I thought about when I wasn't staring at spreadsheets. We talked for almost 3 hours. I kept thinking I should leave, that it was getting late, that this was weird. But the conversation was so easy and natural that I didn't want it to end. She was smart and funny, with a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard. She asked thoughtful questions about my life like she was genuinely interested in the answers. When I finally looked at my phone and saw it was almost 1 in the morning, I couldn't believe how much time had passed. I should probably go, I said, standing up and immediately feeling disappointed. Thank you for the coffee, and for, talking. It was nice. It was the best part of my entire day, she said, walking me to the door. I hope we can do this again sometime. Something in the way she said it made my heart beat faster. I told her I'd like that too. We exchanged phone numbers, and I walked back to my car feeling like something important had just happened. I drove home, replaying the conversation in my head. Victoria Chen wasn't at all what I'd expected. The intimidating CEO I'd seen from a distance was actually lonely and uncertain about things. Just like me. She was dealing with her own problems and insecurities, just in a different context. Over the next few weeks, things shifted at work. We'd pass each other in the hallway and actually acknowledge each other instead of her walking by like I didn't exist. Once we ended up in the elevator together, and instead of her being on her phone the whole time, we talked about the project I was working on. She asked detailed questions and seemed genuinely interested. Another time I saw her in a meeting, and she caught my eye across the room and smiled slightly, like we shared a secret. We started texting. It began with her sending me a message thanking me again for helping with her car. I responded, and we ended up having a whole conversation about our weekends. Then it became more regular. She'd text me about funny things that happened at work or ask my opinion on something random. I'd send her articles I thought she'd find interesting. The texts got longer and more personal. We talked about books we were reading and movies we'd watched. She recommended a novel about a woman finding herself after divorce, and I read it in 3 days just so I could discuss it with her. I suggested a documentary about tech startups, and she watched it and sent me her thoughts. About 5 weeks after that rainy night, I was working late again when I ran into her in the break room. It was after 8 in the evening. Most people had gone home already. She was making coffee, looking tired. Long day, I asked, getting a soda from the vending machine. The longest, she said. I've got a presentation for the board tomorrow morning, and I'm maybe halfway done preparing. We started talking about what she was working on. She explained the challenges of convincing the board to approve a new product line. I found myself offering suggestions, and she actually listened. She pulled out her laptop and showed me some of the slides, asking what I thought. We spent 20 minutes going through her presentation, and I gave her feedback on how to make the data more clear. "You're good at this," she said, looking at me with something like respect. "Have you ever thought about moving into strategy?" Before I could answer, she glanced at her watch. "I'm going to be here another 2 hours at least. But I need to eat something or I'll pass out." The words came out before I could stop them. "Do you want to grab dinner somewhere? When you're done?" She looked surprised. I immediately regretted asking. She was my CEO. This was inappropriate. I was about to take it back when she smiled. "That sounds really nice, actually. Give me an hour." We met in the parking garage an hour later. She changed out of her work blazer into a more casual sweater. Her hair was down instead of pulled back. She looked younger somehow, more relaxed. We went to a small Thai restaurant about 10 minutes from the office. Nothing fancy, just a family-owned place with plastic tablecloths and the smell of lemongrass and chili in the air. We sat in a corner booth, and the conversation picked up right where our late-night coffee had left off weeks ago. She told me more about building her company. The early days when she'd maxed out credit cards and slept on friends' couches. The first investor who'd believed in her vision. The moment when she realized they were actually going to make it. "But success is complicated," she said, pushing pad thai around her plate. "Everyone congratulates you, but nobody asks what you had to sacrifice to get there." I told her about my own struggles. How I'd moved to Seattle to start fresh after Emily left. How I'd taken the first decent job I could find because I needed to pay rent. How I sometimes wondered if I was wasting my potential doing work that didn't excite me. "What would excite you?" she asked. "If you could do anything?" Nobody had ever asked me that before. I thought about it while I ate my spring roll. "I don't know exactly. Something creative maybe. Something where I'm building things instead of just analyzing data for other people's projects." She nodded like she understood completely. The world needs analysts and data people. But if that's not what feeds your soul, then yeah, you should figure out what does. You're 27. You have time. We talked for over 3 hours. The restaurant staff started cleaning around us, giving us looks that said they wanted to close. When we finally paid the bill and walked out into the cool Seattle night, neither of us seemed ready for the evening to end. We stood in the parking lot, and I was very aware of how close we were standing. How good she smelled, like jasmine and something else I couldn't identify. How her eyes looked almost black in the dim light. "I really enjoyed this," she said softly. "Me too," I managed to say. "Maybe we could do it again sometime?" "I'd like that very much." She smiled, and for a moment I thought about kissing her. But I didn't. She was my CEO. She was 13 years older than me. This was already complicated enough. Instead, I told her good night and watched her walk to her car. As I drove home, I couldn't stop smiling. Something was happening between us. Something unexpected and exciting and probably a terrible idea. But I didn't care. For the first time since Emily left, I felt alive again. Our second dinner happened a week later, and this time Victoria chose the place. She texted me the address of a sushi restaurant I'd never heard of, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood far from our office. When I arrived, I understood why she'd picked it. The lighting was dim, the tables were spaced far apart, and soft jazz played in the background. It was the kind of place where you could have a private conversation without worrying about who might overhear. Victoria was already there when I walked in, sitting at a corner table. She'd let her hair down and was wearing a dark green dress that made her look stunning. I felt underdressed in my button-down shirt and khakis. But when she saw me, her face lit up in a way that made my nervousness disappear. We ordered sake and sushi, and the conversation went deeper than it had before. She asked about Emily, and I found myself telling her the whole story. How we'd met in college and dated for 5 years. How Emily had always been focused on status and appearances. How she'd wanted me to want things I didn't actually want. She used to make lists, I said. Goals I should have. Things I should be doing to advance my career. When I told her I was happy just living my life, she said I was settling. Victoria reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. Contentment isn't settling. It's actually one of the hardest things to achieve. Most people spend their whole lives chasing happiness and never find it because they don't know when enough is enough. I asked about her marriage, and she told me things I don't think she'd shared with many people. How she'd met Marcus in graduate school when they were both studying business. How supportive he'd been at first when she talked about starting a company. How that support had slowly turned to resentment as her business grew successful. He wanted to be the provider, she said quietly. The successful one. When I started making more money than him, when my company got attention, he couldn't handle it. He'd make these little comments at parties about how I was never home. How I loved my work more than I loved him. And maybe he was right. By the end, I did love my work more. Because my work didn't make me feel guilty for being good at something. The divorce had been brutal. 2 years of lawyers and arguments about money and who got what. She'd kept the house but lost friends who'd sided with Marcus. She'd thrown herself into work even harder, using it as an excuse not to deal with her loneliness. I convinced myself I was fine alone, she said. That I didn't need anyone. But then my car broke down in the rain, and you stopped to help. And I remembered what it felt like to have someone care without wanting anything in return. We held eye contact across the table, and I felt electricity run through my entire body. This wasn't just dinner between colleagues anymore. This was something else entirely. After we finished eating, we walked along the waterfront. The night was clear and cold, and the city lights reflected off the water. We walked close together, not quite touching but aware of every inch of space between us. Victoria told me about her dreams of traveling more, of taking time to actually enjoy the success she'd worked so hard to build. I told her about my fantasy of maybe starting my own business someday. Something small and creative that was entirely mine. You should do it, she said. You're smart and capable. You just need to believe in yourself the way other people believe in you. What other people? I asked. She stopped walking and turned to face me. Me. I believe in you. We'd reached her car in the parking lot. We stood there in the cold, and I knew this was the moment. Either I was brave enough to take the next step, or I'd regret it forever. I leaned down and kissed her. She kissed me back immediately, her hands coming up to my face. It wasn't a long kiss, but it was enough to confirm what we'd both been feeling. When we pulled apart, she looked up at me with a mixture of happiness and uncertainty. I didn't expect this, she whispered. Neither did I said. But I'm glad it happened. We kissed again, longer this time. When we finally said goodnight, I felt like I was floating. The next few weeks were like living in a dream I didn't want to wake up from. We saw each other constantly outside of work while being extremely careful during business hours. We went to art museums and tried new restaurants and took long walks through different parts of Seattle. I learned that Victoria loved classical music and Korean literature. She discovered that I could cook pretty well and that I did terrible impressions of famous people that made her laugh. We talked about everything. Our childhoods and our fears and our hopes for the future. She told me about growing up in California with immigrant parents who'd sacrificed everything for her education. I told her about my family in Ohio and how my dad had taught me to fix cars and my mom had taught me to be kind. About 4 months into our relationship, Victoria's ex-husband came back into the picture. She told me one evening that Marcus had contacted her about meeting for coffee. He was back in Seattle for business and wanted to discuss some financial matters related to their divorce settlement. I could see the anxiety in her eyes when she told me. It's just coffee, she said. Just business. I don't have any feelings for him at all. I told her I trusted her completely. And I did. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried. The meeting didn't go well. Victoria came to my apartment afterward looking upset. Marcus hadn't wanted to discuss finances at all. He told her he'd made a mistake, that he wanted to try again, that he was willing to move back to Seattle if she'd give him another chance. I told him absolutely not, she said, pacing around my small living room. I told him I was happy with my life now, but he wouldn't listen. He just kept saying I was being stubborn, that I'd regret not giving him another chance. Over the next few weeks, Marcus became a problem. He called her constantly. He sent expensive flowers to her office with notes about how he'd changed. He even showed up at her house one evening while I was there. I answered the door and found myself face to face with a tall man in his early 50s wearing an expensive suit. "Who are you?" he asked, looking me up and down. "A friend," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. Victoria appeared behind me. "Marcus, you need to leave. I told you I'm not interested in talking to you." "A friend." Marcus looked between us, and I saw understanding dawn on his face. "You're dating him? This kid?" The way he said it made anger rise in my chest. Victoria stepped in front of me. "That's none of your business. You need to go." But Marcus wasn't done. He started showing up places where he knew Victoria would be. At the coffee shop near her house. At restaurants she frequented. It all came to a head on a Friday evening when Victoria and I were having dinner at a nice Italian place downtown. We were sitting near the window, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about our plans for the weekend, when I saw Marcus walk in. My stomach dropped. "Don't look now," I said quietly. But Marcus just walked in. Victoria's face went pale. We watched as Marcus looked around the restaurant until his eyes landed on our table. He walked straight over with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Victoria," he said smoothly, "what a coincidence." "It's not a coincidence, and you know it," Victoria said coldly. "You need to stop following me." Marcus ignored her and looked at me. "We haven't been properly introduced. I'm Marcus, Victoria's husband."
Ex-husband, Victoria corrected sharply.
"And this is none of your concern." "I'm just looking out for you," Marcus said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "Making sure you're not making decisions you'll regret. Like dating someone who's in his 20s? Someone who works for you." Other diners were starting to look at us. I felt my face getting hot, but before I could say anything, Victoria stood up. "How dare you?" she said, her voice low and angry. "How dare you come here and judge my life when you spent our entire marriage making me feel small? When you resented every success I had? When you made me choose between my dreams and your ego?" Marcus looked shocked. He'd probably expected her to be embarrassed or defensive. "This is different," he stammered. "He's practically a kid. What could you possibly have in common?" "He treats me with respect," Victoria said. "He supports my goals instead of resenting them. He makes me laugh. He listens when I talk. He's kind and thoughtful and honest. All the things you stopped being years before we got divorced." She grabbed my hand. "And my personal life is no longer your business. You gave up that right when you chose to leave our marriage instead of fighting for it." We left the restaurant with Marcus standing there looking stunned. In the car, Victoria was shaking. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry you had to deal with that." "Don't apologize," I told her. "You were amazing in there." But the confrontation had shaken both of us. That weekend, we had our first really serious conversation about the challenges we were facing. We sat on her back deck with mugs of tea, and Victoria voiced all the fears she'd been holding back. "What if Marcus is right?" she asked. "Not about him, but about us. What if people think I'm taking advantage of you? What if the board finds out and it causes problems for the company? What if you wake up in 5 years and realize you want someone your own age?" I told her I didn't care what people thought. That Marcus was a bitter man who couldn't accept that she'd moved on. That what we had was real and worth fighting for. But I had my own fears too. "What if I'm not successful enough for you?" I admitted. "What if you get tired of dating someone who lives in a studio apartment and drives a car that's older than some of our interns?" Victoria took my hands. "I don't care about money or success. I care about you. About how you make me feel seen and valued. About how you challenge me to be better while accepting me exactly as I am." We talked for hours, working through our insecurities and fears. By the time the sun started to set, we felt stronger. We decided we weren't going to let Marcus or anyone else dictate what our relationship could be. If it became public at work, we'd handle it together. We were done hiding. The next few weeks passed quietly. Marcus stopped showing up everywhere, and I started to believe maybe the worst was behind us. Victoria and I grew even closer. We spent most weekends together, and she gave me a key to her house. We started talking about the future in concrete terms. Maybe moving in together. Maybe traveling to Japan like she'd always wanted. Maybe me finally taking the leap and starting my own consulting business. One Wednesday evening in late April, Victoria was working late on a major presentation for investors. I'd offered to wait for her so we could grab dinner afterward. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage, scrolling through my phone and reading an article, when I heard a sound that made my blood turn cold. Tires screeching, metal crunching, glass shattering. I jumped out of my car and ran toward the sound. It had come from the exit ramp, where the garage curved sharply before leading out to the street. What I saw made my heart stop. Victoria's black Mercedes was crushed against the concrete barrier. The front end was completely smashed. Steam rose from the destroyed hood. The car had clearly lost control on the curve and hit the wall at full speed. I sprinted to the driver's side door. Victoria was slumped against the deployed airbag, not moving. Blood ran down from her temple. Her right arm hung at a weird angle.
Victoria.
I yanked on the door handle, but it was jammed. I ran to the passenger side and managed to get that door open. I reached across and touched her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, steady but fast. She was breathing. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called 911. The operator asked me questions I could barely process. Location. Injuries. Was she conscious? I answered on autopilot while keeping my hand on Victoria's shoulder, talking to her even though she couldn't hear me. You're going to be okay. Help is coming. Just hang on. Please hang on. The paramedics arrived in what felt like hours but was probably only 5 minutes. They worked quickly, carefully removing Victoria from the car and loading her onto a stretcher. One of them asked if I was family. I'm her boyfriend, I said without thinking. They let me ride in the ambulance. I held Victoria's hand the whole way to the hospital, watching the paramedics work and praying to anyone who might be listening that she'd be okay. At the hospital, they took her straight back to be examined. I was left in the waiting room, covered in rain and shaking. I called Victoria's brother in California and told him what happened. He said he'd get on the first flight out. Then I just sat there, staring at the white walls and feeling helpless. About 20 minutes later, people from our company started arriving. Someone from Victoria's executive team had heard about the accident. David Martinez, our CFO, showed up first. Then Sarah Kim from operations. Then a few other people I recognized but didn't really know. They all looked shocked to see me there. Not just there, but clearly devastated. My eyes were red from crying. My clothes were still damp. I was sitting with my head in my hands like my whole world had fallen apart. Because it had. David pulled me aside into a quiet corner of the waiting room. Are you and Victoria involved? He asked directly. I was too scared and too tired to lie. Yes, we've been together for 6 months. We kept it professional at work. We never let it affect our jobs. But yes, we're together. And I love her. I expected him to be angry or to tell me I was in trouble. Instead, he just nodded. Does anyone else know? Not really. We've been private about it. Okay, right now that doesn't matter. What matters is Victoria being okay. But when she's better, we'll need to have a conversation about this. Company policy stuff. Just to make sure everything's documented properly. I nodded, not really caring about company policy when the woman I loved was in an emergency room somewhere behind those doors. After what felt like an eternity, a doctor finally came out. She was young with kind eyes and she looked tired. Victoria Chen's family? Her brother's flying in from California, I said, standing up. I'm her boyfriend. The doctor looked at me for a moment, then seemed to decide that was good enough. She's stable. She has a severe concussion, a fractured wrist, and 3 cracked ribs. We're keeping her overnight for observation because of the head injury, but there's no brain bleeding or internal damage. She's very lucky. The relief that flooded through me was so intense I almost fell down. Can I see her? She's awake and asking for you. 5 minutes only, though. She needs to rest. I followed the doctor back to a room where Victoria was sitting up in bed. Her right wrist was in a cast. A bandage covered part of her forehead. She looked pale and exhausted, but when she saw me, she smiled. "Hey," she said softly. I went to her bedside and took her left hand carefully. "You scared me to death." "I scared myself," she admitted. There was water on the ramp. The car just slid. I couldn't stop it. "I'm just glad you're okay." She squeezed my hand. "David knows about us, doesn't he? I saw him in the waiting room." "Yeah, everyone knows now. They saw how I reacted when I got here. I couldn't hide it." "Are you in trouble?" "I don't care if I am. I only care that you're safe." She smiled again, tears in her eyes. "I love you. I don't think I've said that yet, but I do. I love you." "I love you too," I said, and meant it more than I'd ever meant anything. Over the next few days, word spread through the entire company about Victoria and me. The reactions were mostly positive. A few people seemed surprised, but no one was mean about it. My friend Eric came to my apartment to check on me. "I'm sorry I ever doubted you guys," he said. "Seeing you at that hospital, I realized this is real. You really love her." "I do," I told him. "More than I knew I could love anyone." I spent every evening at Victoria's house helping her with things she couldn't do with her injured wrist. We watched movies and talked and slowly processed everything that had happened. One night, about a week after the accident, Victoria told me something important. Lying in that hospital bed, all I could think about was wasted time. All the energy we spent hiding and worrying about what people would think. "I don't want to do that anymore. I want to actually live my life with you, openly." 2 weeks later, when Victoria was back at work, we had the formal meeting with David. He asked basic questions about our relationship timeline and whether there were any conflicts of interest. We answered honestly. The company didn't have rules against relationships between employees as long as there was no direct reporting relationship. We signed some paperwork and that was it. Our relationship was officially out in the open. We started acting more natural at work. Not unprofessional, but not hiding either. We'd say good morning to each other. We'd occasionally have lunch together in the cafeteria. People adjusted quickly. About a month after the accident, Victoria asked me to move in with her. I'd been practically living there anyway, and it felt like the right next step. Moving in together taught us new things about each other. How she liked her coffee. How I couldn't function before 9 in the morning. How we both hogged the blankets but figured out how to share. One evening about a year after that rainy night when her car first broke down, we were sitting on her back deck watching the sunset. "I never thought I'd be this happy," Victoria said. "I'd given up on finding someone who really understood me. Meeting you showed me what love actually feels like," I told her. "Not the complicated, anxious kind. The kind that makes everything better." 8 months later, I proposed to her at the waterfront where we'd walked after our second date. I'd been carrying the ring for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. When I got down on one knee, she started crying and said yes before I even finished asking. We got married the following November, exactly 2 years after that rainy night when I stopped to help her. The wedding was small and intimate. Eric was my best man. Victoria's brother walked her down the aisle. Even Diane, her friend who'd been skeptical at first, gave a speech about how happy we looked together. Now, for years after our wedding, I can say that marrying Victoria was the best choice I ever made. We've built a life that fits us both. We travel together. We support each other's dreams. I started my own consulting business last year with Victoria's encouragement, and it's growing steadily. People still sometimes mention our age difference, but it matters less as time passes. What matters is how we treat each other, how we laugh together, how we've built something real and lasting. Victoria taught me about confidence and believing in myself. I hope I've taught her that success means nothing without someone to share it with. Looking back, I'm amazed at how many small choices had to line up perfectly. If I hadn't worked late that night, if I hadn't stopped to help, if she hadn't asked me in for coffee, our whole lives would be different. It makes me think that sometimes the universe puts people in your path at exactly the right moment. Our relationship hasn't been easy. We've faced judgment and obstacles and our own fears, but working through those challenges together made us stronger. Every problem we solved deepened our bond. I think about that moment in the parking garage when I saw her car smashed against the wall. How terrified I was of losing her. That's when I truly understood what she meant to me. Not just that I loved her, but that I needed her in my life. That feeling has only grown stronger over the years. Today, we're planning our 6th anniversary and talking about adoption. Victoria is 46 now. I'm 33. We both feel like we're just beginning the best part of our lives together. If you're watching this and wondering whether real love exists or whether age differences matter, I want you to know something. Love doesn't follow rules or timelines. Sometimes the perfect person for you isn't who you expected. Maybe they're older or younger, from a different background, at a completely different life stage. What matters is finding someone who sees the real you. Someone who supports your dreams and challenges you to grow. Someone who makes you feel like the best version of yourself. If you find that person, don't let fear or other people's opinions stop you from pursuing it. Before I finish, please like this video and subscribe if you believe in unexpected love stories. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from or share your own story of unexpected connection. Remember, it's never too late to find love. The best relationships often come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes all it takes is stopping on a rainy night when someone whispers those 5 words, and your entire world shifts into something better than you ever imagined possible.